Hey everyone, my name is Lauren and welcome back to Skeptic She. Today I want to do what I did in my Coming Out Atheist video and read from my written blog. I'll post a link to it in the description. And today what we're going to be talking about is whether or not belief is a choice and why or why not. This is something that I have brought up in pretty much all of my previous videos up to this point. And now it's finally time. If you want to click the link to my blog in the description and follow along, here we go. So is belief a choice? I argue that no, it absolutely is not. Now when I say absolutely, please take it lightly. I don't think we can have absolute certainty about anything, just a figure of speech. Is belief a choice? I argue it absolutely is not. First, let me explain what I mean by the term belief. Since words have usages and not inherent meanings, and the word belief can be used a number of different ways by different people, here's how I use the term. So to paraphrase Matt Dillahunty from the Atheist Experience, he says that belief is acceptance of something as true, or in other words, being convinced of something. I agree with that usage and that is how I'm using it. So lack of belief then is simply not being convinced that something is true. And even though belief is not a choice, our beliefs can still change. So obviously I used to be Christian, I used to be convinced that Jesus Christ existed and was the savior of humanity for most of my life. And then I stopped being convinced of that about 5 years ago for a number of reasons. However, why, when, how, and all the other circumstances that caused my beliefs to change were out of my control. Or all of those circumstances around why I was Christian in the first place, those were out of my control as well. I genuinely believed that I would believe in Jesus for the rest of my life, and that I'd marry the seminarian, now pastor, that I had been dating for 2 months. Ha! Thank goodness that didn't happen. In the video link I've included, Matt Dillahunty goes on to explain that throughout history we've built our current and future understandings of the universe upon all people and events that have come before, doing our best to approach the truth through reasoning. There have been countless mistakes and misjudgments in that process, most of them pretty low impact, but unfortunately some of those mistakes have made it to the most powerful tiers of society and led a lot of people to believe some very significant things on insufficient evidence. So beyond what Matt is saying here, I'll add that people in power are among many possible causes of belief, and as I mentioned, these are largely, if not completely, outside of any person's control, and I don't really think it takes all that much effort to understand that if you believe something, you believe it, regardless of if your words or actions contradict that. For example, and please take this with a grain of salt, I am not an expert on this topic, but I just threw this out as an example. If you are a white person, you could say, I am not a racist, volunteer for organizations that benefit people of color, and you could never have a harsh word to say about people of color, but you can still find yourself thinking violent thoughts or clutching your briefcase tighter as you pass a black man on the street, for example. So in other words, you can still be a racist even if you have no desire to be and are doing everything you can not to be. And you should do everything you can to try to change these types of harmful beliefs. The right combination of factors could eventually lead you to be convinced otherwise. So now going back into the atheism front as another example, this is why I gave up being afraid of hell. Aside from finding insufficient evidence to suggest that such a place exists. Let's say at the end of my life I wanted to be Christian again and decided to attend church, study the Bible, pray, and say that I believed in Jesus. I could still die an atheist after all of that, unconvinced that Jesus exists, let alone that he's the savior of the universe. So if my lack of belief ended up being wrong, the Christian God would know that I did everything I could externally to try to believe in him, yet I remained an atheist. I would go to hell regardless of how hard I tried to believe. Perhaps had some portion of my brain that stores memories been damaged, or had I attended a different church, or had I stumbled into a cult, I would have been convinced that the gospel was true again. But how would I have known or controlled any of that? I could have just said, oh, if I go to that church, I know they'll convince me that Christ is real again. So with those two examples in mind, do you see why belief simply can't be a choice? And with this example of hell in mind, just as a side note, thank goodness we don't have sufficient evidence to suggest that the Judeo-Christian God, or any God, exists, because it is horrendously cruel to sentence anyone to eternal torture for their beliefs or lack thereof, especially when they don't have a say in what causes them. There's not a whole lot of evidence for hell in the Bible anyway. So for those of you who are like, well, don't you want that to be true? Don't you want to live forever? Don't you want the Judeo-Christian God, who is love, who is compassion, to exist? Based on my understanding of the Bible, no, I don't. So now I want to list some factors that can influence belief. They're all self-explanatory in my opinion, and a few are from Sam Harris's book Free Will. I actually have it. Free Will by Sam Harris. It's very good. So anyway, here are 20 potential causes of belief or non-belief. Birthplace, upbringing or parents or guardianship, education, brain physiology, peer pressure, media exposure, work environment or inability to work, pre-existing medical conditions, mental health, authority figures, romantic partners, self-esteem, age, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, hormones, siblings or being an only child, traumatic experiences, and living environment. I'm sure there are many more than these, but even this handful of influences tells me that neither my belief in God nor my eventual lack of belief were my choice. And along these lines, I was going to discuss why free will is an illusion, but I would be making essentially the same points on that as I am about belief. And I'm just going to quote Sam Harris here. He puts it really eloquently. Our sense of free will, or for this video's purposes, our free choice of belief, results from a failure to appreciate this. We do not know what we intend to do until the intention itself arises. To understand this is to realize that we are not the authors of our thoughts and actions in the way that people generally suppose. And in a later chapter he continues, what we do subsequent to conscious planning tends to most fully reflect the global properties of our minds, our beliefs, desires, goals, prejudices, etc. If, after weeks of deliberation with your friends, library research, and debate, you still decide to kill the king, well, then killing the king reflects the sort of person you really are. The point is not that you are the ultimate and independent cause of your actions. The point is that, for whatever reason, you have the mind of a regicide. Once we recognize that even the most terrifying predators are, in a very real sense, unlucky to be who they are, the logic of hating as opposed to fearing them begins to unravel. So this line of thinking in these quotes from Sam Harris is why I've become more compassionate and willing to listen to others, knowing that we all have little to no say in what will convince us to think or act as we do. Now that's not to say that dangerous people shouldn't be incarcerated, for example, that people shouldn't have consequences for their actions, but I digress. Harris does a great job at finishing that thought, and I don't want to just sit here and regurgitate his entire book or go down the free will rabbit hole at this time. With all of that said, why does anyone bother to talk about their beliefs or debate their beliefs if they're not chosen? So I will give you that since I'm convinced that we can't choose what we're convinced of, teehee, I would rather not debate folks about their deeply held beliefs at this time. Plus, I'm not really a wizard at speaking on the spot anyway. However, I do find it a worthy goal to try to ease people in the direction of questioning, challenging, or otherwise looking at their own beliefs from a different perspective. Street epistemology is something I'd like to get better at going forward, and I did include a link to Anthony Magnabosco's channel. He is all about street epistemology. He goes into great detail about what it is, and he's really good at having civilized and genuine and thought-provoking conversations with people who disagree with him. And that's really what I would like to be able to do eventually. More importantly, as I just mentioned, having been several denominations of Christian and now an atheist has equipped me to approach Christians and other theists with compassion, empathy, and a greater willingness to listen to their concerns about the world. And this also applies to anyone that I tend to disagree with. It doesn't have to be religiously related. Now this is definitely not always easy. I certainly got overzealous and angry at Christians after first losing my faith, but now that I've had 5 years to grow past that and kind of step back, I remind myself of how deeply I was also convinced of the truth of the Bible's teachings, just like my Christian friends are. Finally, I think I am more open to being proven wrong and changing my mind because I don't have control over what new knowledge may come my way in the future. I want to glean from as many resources and experiences as possible to keep finding truth and discarding falsehoods. But alas, the catch remains. Why I trust certain resources or seek certain experiences over others, why I have the biases that I have, and whether or not any of these sources or experiences will change my mind about anything, that's not up to me. That is all I have on that post for today. I hope it sufficiently answered your question as to why I don't think belief is a choice. I don't claim to be an expert on any of this. I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a biologist, I'm not an anthropologist, but I do glean from people who are much smarter than me, and I hope that you take a look at Sam Harris's Free Will. Not sponsored. No one sponsors me, I don't make any money on this channel. I hope you take a look at Sam Harris's works, at Matt Dillahunty's show. Also, a lot of people who are on the Atheist Experience, like Tracy Harris, Jen Peoples, a whole bunch of other cool people. They all kind of take slightly different approaches to their lack of belief in a god and how they came to think the way that they think. With all that said, thank you all so much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. Share this with your friends. Keep asking questions, and I will see you next time. Take 80 bajillion